Hatshepsut was married to Thutmose II, her half-brother, when she was 14 or 15 years old. They were around the same age when they married. Upon the death of Thutmose II, the underage Thutmose III became the Pharaoh of Egypt. Hatshepsut was thought of by early modern scholars to have only served as regent alongside him. Modern scholars agree that, while Hatshepsut initially served as regent for young Thutmose III from his accession in 1479 BC, she eventually assumed the position of pharaoh alongside him by year 7 of his reign, 1472 BC, becoming queen regnant. Hatshepsut was described as having a reign of about 22 years by ancient authors, which included both her regency and her reign as queen regnant. Josephus and Julius Africanus follow the earlier testimony of Manetho, 3rd century BC, mentioning a queen regnant called Amesis or Amensis, specified by Josephus to have been the sister of her predecessor. This woman was later identified by historians as Hatshepsut. In Josephus's text, her reign is described as lasting 21 years and 9 months, while Africanus stated it was 22 years, apparently rounding up. The latest attestation of Hatshepsut in contemporary records comes from year 20 of the regnal count of Thutmose III, and she is no longer mentioned in year 22, when he undertook his first major foreign campaign. This is compatible with the 21 years 9 months recorded by Manetho and Josephus, which would place the end of Hatshepsut's reign in year 22 of Thutmose III. The earliest attestation of Hatshepsut as pharaoh occurs in the tomb of Ramose and Hatnofer, where a collection of grave goods contained a single pottery jar or amphora from the tomb's chamber, which was stamped with the date year 7. Another jar from the same tomb, which was discovered in situ by a 1935-36 Metropolitan Museum of Art expedition on a hillside near Thebes, was stamped with the seal of the god's wife Hatshepsut, while 2 jars bore the seal of the good goddess Matkar. The dating of the amphorae, sealed into the burial chamber by the debris from Senenmut's own tomb, is undisputed, which means that Hatshepsut was acknowledged as pharaoh and no longer merely regent of Egypt by year 7 of her reign. Hatshepsut re-established a number of trade networks that had been disrupted during the Hyksos occupation of Egypt during the Second Intermediate Period. She oversaw the preparations and funding for a mission to the land of Punt. Hatshepsut's delegation returned from Punt bearing 31 live myrrh trees and other luxuries such as frankincense. Hatshepsut would grind the charred frankincense into coal eyeliner. This is the first recorded use of the resin. Hatshepsut had the expedition commemorated in relief at Deir el Bahri, which is also famous for its realistic depiction of Queen Ati of the land of Punt. Hatshepsut also sent raiding expeditions to Byblos and the Sinai Peninsula shortly after the Punt expedition. Very little is known about these expeditions. Although many Egyptologists have claimed that her foreign policy was mainly peaceful, it is possible that she led military campaigns against Nubia and Canaan. Hatshepsut was one of the most prolific builders in ancient Egypt, commissioning hundreds of construction projects throughout both Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Many of these building projects were temples to build her religious base and legitimacy beyond her position as God's wife of Amun. At these temples, she performed religious rituals that had hitherto been reserved for kings, corroborating the evidence that Hatshepsut assumed traditionally male roles as pharaoh. She employed the great architect Inanni, who also had worked for her father, her husband, and for the royal steward Senenmut. The extant artifacts of the statuary provide archaeological evidence of Hatshepsut's portrayals of herself as a male pharaoh, with physically masculine traits and traditionally male ancient Egyptian garb, such as a false beard and ram's horns. Following the tradition of most pharaohs, Hatshepsut had monuments constructed at the Temple of Karnak. She also restored the original precinct of Mut, the great ancient goddess of Egypt, at Karnak that had been ravaged by the foreign rulers during the Hyksos occupation. It later was ravaged by other pharaohs, who took one part after another to use in their own projects. She had twin obelisks erected at the entrance to the temple, which at the time of building were the tallest in the world. Only one remains upright, which is the second tallest ancient obelisk still standing, the other having toppled and broken in 2. The official in charge of those obelisks was the High Steward Amenhotep. Another project, Karnak's Red Chapel. Later, she ordered the construction of 2 more obelisks to celebrate her 16th year as pharaoh. One of the obelisks broke during construction, and a third was therefore constructed to replace it. The broken obelisk was left at its quarrying site in Aswan, where it remains. Known as the unfinished obelisk, it provides evidence of how obelisks were quarried. Hatshepsut built the Temple of Pakhet at Beni Hassan in the Minya Governorate south of Al-Minya. The name, Pakhet, was a synthesis that occurred by combining Bast and Sekhmet, who were similar lioness war goddesses, in an area that bordered the north and south division of their cults. The cavernous underground temple, cut into the rock cliffs on the eastern side of the Nile, was admired and called the Speos Artemidos by the Greeks. The temple is thought to have been built alongside much more ancient ones that have not survived. This temple has an architrave with a long dedicatory text, bearing Hatshepsut's famous denunciation of the Hyksos that James P. Allen has translated. This temple was altered later, and some of its insides were altered by Seti Burmund of the 19th dynasty in an attempt to have his name replace that of Hatshepsut. Following the tradition of many pharaohs, the masterpiece of Hatshepsut's building projects was a mortuary temple. She built hers in a complex at Deir el Bahri. The identity of the architect behind the project remains unclear. It is possible that Senenmut, the overseer of works, or Hapusaneb, the high priest, were responsible. It is also likely that Hatshepsut provided input to the project. Located opposite the city of Luxor, it is considered to be a masterpiece of ancient architecture. The complex's focal point was the Holy of Holies. Hyperbole is common to virtually all royal inscriptions of Egyptian history. While all ancient leaders used it to laud their achievements, Hatshepsut has been called the most accomplished pharaoh at promoting her accomplishments. Hatshepsut assumed all the regalia and symbols of the pharaonic office in official representations: the cat head cloth, topped with the uraeus, the traditional false beard, and shendit kilt. Hatshepsut was ambiguous and androgynous in many of her statues and monuments. She would create a masculine version of herself to establish herself in the Egyptian patriarchy. Osirian statues of Hatshepsut, as with other pharaohs, depict the dead pharaoh as Osiris, with the body and regalia of that deity. To further lay her claim to the throne, priests told a story of divine birth. In this myth, Amun goes to Ahmose in the form of Thutmose III, and Hatshepsut is conceived by Ahmose. Khnum, the god who forms the bodies of human children, is then instructed to create a body and K, or corporal presence life force, for Hatshepsut. Heket, the goddess of life and fertility, and Khnum then lead Ahmose along to a place where she gives birth to Hatshepsut. Reliefs depicting each step in these events are at Karnak and in her mortuary temple. Hatshepsut's last dated attestation as pharaoh is year 23 Pere, day 2, c. the 22nd of May, 1459 BC, but the reign length of 21 years and 9 months in Manetho and Josephus indicates that she ceased to reign in year 22, c. 1458 BC. The precise date of the beginning of Thutmose III's reign as sole ruler of Egypt, and presumably of Hatshepsut's death, is considered to be year 22, 2 Pere, day 10, recorded on a single stela erected at Armant, corresponding to the 16th of January 1458 BC. This information validates the basic reliability of Manetho's king list records. Hatshepsut began constructing a tomb when she was the great royal wife of Thutmose II. Still, the scale of this was not suitable for a pharaoh, so when she ascended the throne, preparation for another burial started. For this, KV-20, originally quarried for her father, Thutmose III, and probably the first royal tomb in the Valley of the Kings, was extended with a new burial chamber. Hatshepsut also refurbished her father's burial and prepared for a double interment of both Thutmose I and her within KV-20. Therefore, it is likely that when she died, no later than the 22nd year of her reign, she was interred in this tomb along with her father. During Thutmose III's reign, a new tomb, KV-38, was constructed along with fresh burial equipment for Thutmose I. Thus, Thutmose I was relocated from his original tomb and reburied elsewhere. There is a possibility that at the same time, Hatshepsut's mummy was moved into the tomb of her nurse, Sitra-in KV-60. These actions could have been motivated by Amenhotep II, Thutmose III's son from a secondary wife, in an effort to secure his own uncertain claim to the throne. Besides what was recovered from KV-20 during Egyptologist Howard Carter's clearance of the tomb in 1903, Other funerary furniture belonging to Hatshepsut has been found elsewhere, including a lioness throne or bedstead, a Senate game board with carved lioness-headed red jasper game pieces bearing her pharaonic title, a signet ring, and a partial Shabti figurine bearing her name. In the royal mummy cache at DB 320, Hatshepsut is, according to Egyptologist James Henry Breasted, the first great woman in history of whom we are informed. In some ways, Hatshepsut's reign was seen as going against the patriarchal system of her time. She managed to rule as regent for a son who was not her own, going against the system which had previously only allowed mothers to rule on behalf of their biological sons. She used this regency to create her female kingship, constructing extensive temples to celebrate her reign, which meant that the public became used to seeing a woman in such a powerful role. However, as with other female heads of state in ancient Egypt, this was only done through the use of male symbols of kingship, hence the description of Hatshepsut and others as female kings rather than queens. Hatshepsut was arguably placed in power by men to further their own wealth. She gained power when Egypt had recently amassed extensive wealth, implying that she was placed in power by Egyptian elites due to her record as successful in various domains, as high priestess or as a placeholder serving for her father Thutmose III in Thebes while he was away on military campaigns. This record of success made such elites confident that she could handle Egyptian wealth and trade, capitalizing on Egypt's moment of prosperity. Indeed, historian Kara Cooney describes Hatshepsut as, arguably, the only woman to have ever taken power as king in ancient Egypt during a time of prosperity and expansion.